Usually, when we look at ancient history, we sort of bring our modern backpacks with us.
Right, yeah. We pack heavy.
Exactly. We bring our modern morals, our legal frameworks, our, contemporary expectations of how a society ought to function, and we just basically empty all of that out onto the ancient world.
Which is really comfortable, right?
Oh, for sure. It is incredibly comforting to judge the past by the standards of the present.
Yeah, it makes us feel evolved.
Right. But today, we are examining a text that just demands you drop that backpack entirely.
Totally leave it at the door.
Yeah. We're looking at this really brutal ancient premise. The idea that sometimes under certain historical and physical conditions, mercy is mathematically impossible.
It's a really heavy concept.
It is. Today we are exploring a really dense, highly philosophical, and honestly kind of terrifying text. It's called The Root and the Blade, Understanding Divine Judgment and Continuity.
And this text, it really strips away that luxury of modern distance we just talked about. The author builds this massive architectural argument about survival and what they call generative continuity.
Generative continuity, right.
Exactly. And it gets into the absolutely chilling realities of ancient justice when you compare it to our modern capacity.
It's a huge comparison.
It is. The central thesis really forces you to look at why societies do the things they do just to survive, and how the physical infrastructure of a society dictates its actual capacity for mercy.
But, before we go any further, I think it is critical to set some parameters for this deep dive.
Oh, absolutely. We need ground rules for this one.
We really do, because this text touches on themes that are, well, they're extraordinarily heavy and highly politically and religiously charged.
Yeah, it gets into biblical warfare, ancient destruction, modern immigration.
Societal collapse, all of it. So our role as your guides today is strictly neutral.
Completely neutral.
Right. We are not taking sides. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the author. And we are definitely not advocating for the theology or the politics presented in this text.
No, not at all.
We are just acting as impartial tour guides, right? Walking you through the mechanics of a very complex, very controversial piece of intellectual architecture.
I like that. We're basically just mapping the load-bearing walls of the argument.
Exactly.
You're examining how the foundation is poured, how the logic holds together under stress, but we're not telling you whether or not you should move into the building.
Well said. So, the author actually begins this entire architectural argument by going straight to the dictionary.
Right, stripping it down to the stubs.
Yeah. They tear down the word genocide to its absolute earliest etymological roots.
The Greek and Latin.
Right, to genos and stoins.
And the author makes this really fundamental distinction early on. They state the root supports the branch. The branch does not support the root.
The root supports the branch. Okay.
Right. So in our modern legal frameworks, the way we use that word in, say, a tribunal at The Hague, that is the branch.
That's in the modern application.
Exactly. But to grasp the mechanics of ancient history and survival, the author says we have to isolate the root.
Which is genos.
Yes. Genos or genus, which refers to a kind, a stock, a tribe, or a people.
Okay.
The author defines it specifically as generative continuity.
Generative continuity.
Right. It's a corporate order, a birth body. Basically, it's a system that reproduces its own image over and over.
Got it. And then the suffix aside.
Side simply means the act of cutting down, killing, or destroying.
Okay, so at the most literal root level, the word just means the destruction of a generative body.
Exactly. That's the clinical definition they use.
But I have to push back on this framing a little bit, though.
Sure, go for it.
Because reducing such a historically loaded, horrifying word to a clinical Greek and Latin prefix and suffix, it feels like a semantic trick.
Like a loophole.
Yeah. It feels like we were sanitizing an atrocity by treating it as, like, a linguistic math problem.
I hear that. And the clinical tone is definitely intentional, but not for the sake of minimizing the horror.
Okay, then why do it?
The author categorizes it this way because they argue that the physical action itself, the destruction of a generative body, doesn't automatically answer the moral question.
Wait, the moral question of whether the act is evil.
Right, whether the act is evil or just. The author says the moral question relies entirely on the nature of the genos that's being destroyed.
I fail to see a scenario where destroying an entire people group leaves room for a moral gray area.
It's tough to swallow, I know.
Yeah.
But the author asks you to consider two vastly different types of generative continuity.
Okay. Walk me through them.
On one hand, you have an innocent bloodline, a group of people targeted simply for their ethnicity, their inherited identity, just their mere existence.
Which is what we usually mean when we say genocide.
Right. And the author absolutely condemns the destruction of this kind of genos as the ultimate evil. There's no debate there.
Good. Okay.
But then the text poses a hypothetical. What if the target is a, quote, guilty corporate death order?
A guilty corporate death order, meaning what, a society built on predatory mechanics?
Precisely. Imagine this massive cultic system or an empire whose entire economy relies on, like, continuous violent raiding.
Or a society built around child sacrifice.
Exactly. What if the genos in question is essentially a war machine that only reproduces violence and death through its own generative continuity?
Okay, I see where this is going.
Yeah, the author argues that tearing down a generative apparatus that only generates destruction is fundamentally, categorically different from targeting an innocent population.
It's an intense distinction. But calling a society a generative order, it sounds intensely biological.
It really does.
It paints a picture of a civilization functioning as a singular organism, which naturally implies that a destructive society is like a disease spreading through a larger body.
And you just hit on exactly where the text goes next.
Really?
Yeah, the text leans heavily into that exact biological parallel to explain generative continuity.
Okay, what's the specific analogy?
The specific analogy they use is cancer.
Cancer, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Think about it biologically. A cancer cell is not a foreign invader like a virus or a bacterium.
Right, it's not from outside the body.
Exactly. It is human cellular life. The phrase the author uses to describe it is self-data misgoverned.
Oh, self-data misgoverned. I actually really like that phrase.
It's striking, right?
It is. It's the body's own material, but it has rebelled against the rules of the larger organism.
Yes, it essentially develops its own point of view.
Right.
A healthy cell operates within strict boundaries. It knows when to grow, when to stop growing, and when to undergo apoptosis, programs cell death for the good of the organism.
Sure.
But a cancer cell corrupts those boundaries. It establishes its own trajectory of endless survival, endless replication, and immune evasion.
It just refuses to stop.
Exactly. It even tricks the body into building blood vessels directly to the tumor to feed it, stealing resources from healthy tissue.
So the local life order has become entirely disordered against the larger life order.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. And the text introduces a concept here called the immaturity hinge.
The immaturity hinge.
Yeah, which makes the biological analogy incredibly vivid. The author points out that an oncologist does not look at a brand new, single, immature cancer cell and say, well, it hasn't actually done any systemic damage yet.
Right. They don't say, let's wait and see what it decides to do.
Exactly. You do not judge a baby cancer cell by its current lack of impact.
Because you evaluate the threat based on the generative order the cell belongs to.
You judge it by the genetic trajectory it is inherently structured to reproduce.
Its immaturity doesn't erase its programming.
Not at all.
Yeah.
The cell is bound to replicate its own misgoverned data. That is its nature.
Okay, but, and I have to stop you here, the moment you apply that to human beings, the logic becomes incredibly dangerous.
Oh, absolutely.
Because human beings are not cells in a petri dish.
No, we aren't.
We possess free will, cognition, the capacity for moral reasoning. Yeah. A human child born into a hostile empire or a violent death cult is not biologically programmed to replicate the sins of their parents.
Right.
So equating a human child in, I don't know, Carthage or Sparta to a mutating rogue T-cell, it flattens humanity in a way that usually precedes horrific atrocities.
I completely agree with you. And the fascinating thing is the author completely agrees with you too.
They do?
Yes. In fact, the text explicitly warns against weaponizing this analogy to dehumanize people.
Okay, good. Because that's a slippery slope.
A very slippery slope. The author states unequivocally that human beings are not merely biological cells. A child is never morally identical to the political or military order they are born into.
Right.
A cancer cell can't be negotiated with, it can't change its nature, and it can't be taught new biological rules.
It just says what it is.
Exactly. But human beings can be integrated. They can be adopted, healed, educated, and brought into an entirely different civic or moral order.
Okay, but see, that creates a massive logical trap for the author's own argument.
How?
Well, if human beings can be separated from their toxic systems, if they can be reformed and integrated, why did ancient warfare so consistently result in the total destruction of conquered peoples?
Ah, I see where you're going.
Right. If the ancient kings knew that human children weren't biologically programmed to be enemies forever, Why didn't the victorious armies simply adopt the defeated populations?
It's the obvious question.
Why not dismantle the hostile regime and just integrate the citizens?
And the author's answer to that exact question introduces probably the most vital concept in the entire text.
Which is
The infrastructure of mercy.
the infrastructure of mercy.
Yes.
I have to say, when I read this section, this completely shattered my preconceived notions of historical warfare.
It really reframes everything, doesn't it?
It does. Break it down for us.
So we commit a profound fallacy when we look back at ancient history.
Right, the backpack we talked about earlier.
Exactly. We subconsciously retrofit our modern communication grids and social safety nets onto Bronze Age societies.
We just assume they had what we have.
Yeah. When we think of ancient infrastructure, we usually think of physical things.
Yeah.
Aqueducts, stone walls, roads.
Pyramids, coliseums, that sort of thing.
Right. But the author argues the most crucial infrastructure is actually human communication and social administration.
Like what?
Like a shared standardized language, mass public education, civil courts, reliable legal records, complex adoption systems, foster care, translation services, de-radicalization protocols.
Things that simply did not exist.
Exactly. We watch a historical drama, right? And a king stands on a balcony, issues a pardon to 10,000 conquered people.
And the music swells.
Yes. And the next day, they're all seamlessly woven into the local economy as blacksmiths and farmers.
But it's a total fantasy.
It is entirely a fantasy. The reality is that the ancient world lacked the stable, mass-scale, rights-based bureaucratic machinery required to turn a hostile outsider into a loyal participant of a new society.
They just didn't have the paperwork, let alone the social workers.
Exactly. Ancient people had crude tools, they had treaties, the taking of high-status hostages, political marriages.
But those were incredibly fragile.
Very fragile. They depended entirely on personal relationships, fear, or just a localized show of force.
You know, let's actually examine the hostage system for a second.
Sure.
Because that is how empires like Rome or Babylon tried to do exactly what we were talking about.
How?
Integrating the elites of a conquered genos.
Right. Taking the sons of the conquered kings.
Exactly. Rome would conquer a tribal confederation and demand the sons of the local chieftains. They would bring these boys back to Rome, give them Roman education, Roman names, Roman military training.
They were trying to build a mental infrastructure.
Exactly. They wanted these boys to return to their tribes a decade later as Romanized rulers who would just keep the peace.
But it failed
Constantly. Because the infrastructure wasn't deep enough to overwrite the generative continuity of the tribe.
Right.
You get figures like Arminius.
Oh, perfect example.
Right. Raised in Rome, educated by the empire, entrusted with Roman legions. And the moment he was sent back to his homeland, his original tribal continuity reasserted itself.
He turned right back into a tribal leader.
He led 3 Roman legions into the Teutoburg forest and absolutely annihilated them.
And that historical reality underscores the author's primary thesis for this whole section. Mercy requires infrastructure.
Mercy requires infrastructure.
Yes. Without a vast, resilient system capable of metabolizing an influx of people, sparing a defeated, hostile enemy is not an act of kindness.
What is it then?
It is civic suicide.
Because it transforms the surviving population into a Trojan horse.
Exactly.
I mean, just put yourself in the sandals of an ancient ruler for a moment. You lead a fragile city-state.
Okay.
Your entire survival depends on a precarious harvest and maybe a few granaries.
You're always one drought away from starvation.
Right. You have no digital databases to track citizenship. You have no public schools to teach these newcomers your laws or your language.
No, none of that.
You barely have enough armed guards to maintain order among your own citizens. And you have just defeated an enemy city whose entire religious and cultural identity is bound by blood oaths to see your city burn.
It's a terrifying scenario.
So you now have 10,000 of their surviving citizens outside your gates. The modern impulse is to ask, well, how can we show them mercy?
But the ancient mechanical reality is totally different.
It's, how do we feed them without starving our own children?
Exactly.
How do we absorb their priesthood, their displaced elites, and their warriors without them simply regrouping inside our walls and slitting our throats while we sleep?
The ancient system just lacked the sheer physical and social capacity to separate the innocent person from the hostile continuity at scale.
The capacity just wasn't there.
Right. And the author distills this brutal mathematical reality into a very sharp axiom.
What's the axiom?
Input is not integration. Permission is not capacity.
Input is not integration. You know, That reminds me of swallowing a daily vitamin.
A vitamin. Okay, how so?
Like if you swallow a complex multivitamin whole, that is input, you gave the pill permission to enter your body.
Okay, I follow.
But if your stomach acid-like, your internal infrastructure, is not strong enough to break down the casing, extract the nutrients, and distribute them to your cells, the vitamin does not become part of your body.
It doesn't integrate.
Exactly. It doesn't integrate. It either passes through uselessly or it causes a severe blockage that makes you sick.
That analogy captures the mechanics perfectly. A receiving body must be able to metabolize what enters it.
Metabolized, yeah.
And the author uses this exact principle to draw a direct parallel to the modern era, specifically regarding the mechanics of immigration.
Oh, this is the part that gets really thorny.
It does. And again, as a reminder to you listening, the text is isolating the structural mechanics of throughput and capacity here.
Right. Entirely separate from the modern political debates surrounding border policy.
Exactly. We are strictly talking mechanics.
So what does the author argue about modern immigration?
The author argues that in modern discourse, we completely obsess over legal status.
Was entry permitted by the state? Is it legal or illegal? That kind of thing?
Exactly. But legal status only answers the question of permission.
Oh, I see it.
It does absolutely nothing to answer the question of capacity.
Because a stamped visa or an open border policy doesn't just magically manifest new physical infrastructure.
No, it doesn't.
Permission doesn't instantaneously construct new public schools to handle language barriers.
Right.
It doesn't magically generate affordable housing or expand the labor market or spontaneously create all those deep, invisible layers of civic trust required for a diverse society to function.
Exactly. The text argues that even highly regulated, lawful, permitted inflow can fracture a society if the speed and volume of the input exceed the society's capacity to metabolize and integrate it.
It's a throughput issue.
Yes, and illegal entry bypasses the integration machinery entirely, which puts immense strain on the local structures that were never designed to handle unmeasured throughput.
Right. And the author is really careful to stress that the resulting friction is not inherently born of malice or xenophobia, right?
No, not at all. It's a structural failure.
It is the mechanical reality of a body politic attempting to metabolize an influx without dissolving its own internal order.
Exactly. And crucially, when the infrastructure fails, it doesn't just damage the host society.
It damages the newcomers, too.
Yes, it destroys the incoming persons as well, trapping them in these marginalized, parallel societies that breed resentment and instability.
So if a society cannot metabolize the influx, the internal order just begins to collapse.
That's the argument, yeah.
Which forces to look back at the ancient world with a completely different lens.
How so?
Well, if modern nation states, I mean, we're armed with trillion-dollar economies, sophisticated digital bureaucracies, global supply chains, dedicated departments of social services.
Right, massive capacity.
If we buckle under the friction of metabolizing human influxes, the ancient world had absolutely zero chance.
Zero. The ancient generals possessed no communication networks or economic surplus to safely metabolize a hostile continuity at scale.
None.
Therefore, when an ancient commander stood over a conquered, hostile city, the decision of what to do with the survivors was not dictated by sentimentality.
It was a cold, brutal calculation of physical survival.
Exactly.
The general had to ask, can this defeated generative body be safely separated from its war-making, oath-bound, revenge-driven culture without reproducing that exact same existential threat a generation from now inside our own borders?
And under the physical and infrastructural constraints of the Bronze Age, the answer was almost universally no.
No, they just couldn't do it.
So total destruction, therefore, becomes structurally intelligible.
Intelligible, meaning it makes logical sense within their reality.
Right. It ceases to be mere sadistic bloodlust and becomes a grim mathematical necessity for the survival of the victor's own genos.
Okay, I see the mechanical logic. If mercy is mathematically impossible due to a lack of infrastructure, total war is the only logical outcome for survival.
Right.
But here's where the author's argument hits a massive theological wall for me.
Okay, let's hit the wall.
How does the author bridge the gap between a Bronze Age king massacring a city because he lacks the grain to feed them and a righteous act of divine judgment? Because if it is just brutal military math, calling it divine judgment just sounds like an ancient warlord blaming God for his own logistical failures.
It's a very fair critique. And the author anticipates this exact collision.
You know, they do.
Yes, and they draw a profound theological boundary here.
Okay, what is it?
When the text defends the righteousness of biblical genocide, specifically referencing events like the flood, the destruction of Sodom, or the judgments against the Canaanite empires.
Really heavy biblical stuff.
Right. The author explicitly separates divine action from human military pragmatism.
So the text argues that divine judgment is not motivated by tribal hatred, economic convenience, or a lack of grain.
Exactly. The entire justification rests on a single, non-transferable premise.
Which is?
Divine omniscience.
Divine omniscience, okay.
God, acting as the creator and judge of the universe, is the only entity possessing the capacity to judge a corporate death order with absolute flawless knowledge.
Because an omniscient God can see the whole tree simultaneously.
Yes.
The root, the branch, the fruit, and the seed.
All at once.
Whereas a human general is just guessing based on logistics and fear.
Exactly. God knows the exact immutable trajectory of that society. God knows precisely if that corporate order is capable of being healed, if those individuals can be separated and reformed.
Or if the spiritual and cultural corruption is so absolute that the generative body must be completely cut off to prevent it from consuming everything else.
Right. Humans lack omniscience. We are blinded by bias, limited by time, and constrained by our lack of capacity.
You just can't see the whole tree.
So the text argues that when God judges a genos, it is a righteous act of cosmic surgery based on perfect knowledge.
Cosmic surgery.
But when man attempts to replicate that destruction on his own authority, it is catastrophic.
You know, the author delivers a line here that completely reframes the concept of religious violence for me.
Which line?
They write, if man imitates that judgment without command, knowledge, and authority, it becomes murder-wearing stolen theology.
Murder-wearing stolen theology. It's chilling.
It really is. It strips the divine justification away from any human crusade, pogrom, or holy war.
It completely delegitimizes the weaponization of these ancient texts for modern conflicts.
Yes, because you do not possess divine omniscience. You have not been given a direct, undeniable divine command.
Right.
Therefore, if you attempt to replicate the absolute destruction of a generative body, you are not acting as the hand of God.
No.
You are a murderer playing dress-up in stolen religious garments.
It is an incredibly rigorous boundary the author establishes. It totally prevents the mechanics of ancient judgment from being used as a modern blueprint.
It's a really necessary boundary, I think.
Definitely. But, the text successfully isolates the destruction of an enemy's continuity as a strictly divine prerogative. But the author does not stop there.
No. Where else do they go?
They take the entire architectural framework, generative continuity, infrastructure, the metabolism of a society, and turn it inward to examine an even more terrifying phenomenon.
Ah, the ultimate inversion.
Yes.
We have spent this entire deep dive analyzing how one society destroys the generative continuity of another.
Right, outward destruction.
But the text concludes by exploring what happens when a society voluntarily destroys its own continuity.
When it turns inward.
Exactly, when it devours its own seed.
To illustrate this, the author references one of the most horrifying biblical curses associated with a collapsing society.
Which is?
The warning that a besieged people will be reduced to eating their own children.
Yeah, when you encounter that in a historical text, you usually just read it literally.
Right, you think of a siege.
Yeah, it describes the physical horrors of a prolonged siege, where starvation drives a population to literal cannibalism.
But the author treats the physical act of cannibalism as merely the grotesque terminal symptom of a much deeper structural disease.
What do they call it?
They call it covenant collapse.
Covenant collapse.
The author argues that the divine warning is not merely about a lack of food. It is describing a society whose spiritual and structural architecture has so thoroughly collapsed that it is handed over to the logical endpoint of its own death order.
Wow.
The text states ominously, there is more than one way to devour a child.
More than one way to devour a child. The spectrum of devouring laid out by the author is intensely relevant to modern society.
It really is.
Because you can consume a child's future without ever resorting to physical cannibalism.
Right.
You devour them by sacrificing them to an ideological crusade.
Mm-hmm.
You devour them by sending them to fight endless wars for imperial status or corporate profit.
Or a society devours its youth by saddling them with insurmountable debt just to fund the comforts of the aging generation.
Exactly. And on a familial level, a parent devours a child by forcing them to carry the parent's unresolved shame.
Or their anxiety, or their demand for perfection.
Right. You consume a child when you use them as a vessel to achieve the dreams you failed to realize yourself.
The text actually pinpoints helicopter parenting as a prime example of this inversion.
Yes. And the psychology behind that is devastating.
Walk us through it.
Okay, think about the mechanics of extreme overparenting. You genuinely believe you are protecting the child.
Right, you have good intentions.
Exactly. So you hover over every decision, you shield them from every minor consequence, and you curate their entire existence.
Okay.
But when protection metastasizes into possession, the parent is effectively eating the child's agency before adulthood can even take root.
Wow.
You are suffocating their capacity to develop resilience. The love corrupts, and nurture becomes an appetite for control.
You are consuming the life you were supposed to be cultivating.
Exactly. It's a brilliant psychological insight mapped onto an ancient metaphor.
It really is. In a healthy, righteous, generative order, the natural flow of life is downward and outward.
Downward and outward.
Right. The parent pours their resources, their wisdom, and their very life into the child to secure the future.
The root supports the branch.
Yes. But in a state of judgment collapse, the flow of life violently reverses.
It goes inward and upward.
Exactly. The parent begins to extract life, agency, and future potential from the child to soothe their own anxieties or maintain their own status.
The present eats the future.
The present eats the future.
That is the ultimate diagnostic metric of a collapsing society. A healthy order sacrifices itself to protect its children. A corrupt order sacrifices its children to protect itself.
And the society becomes entirely trapped inside the consequences of its own disordered continuity.
So the literal historical instances of starving populations consuming their young, those were just the final visible manifestation of a spiritual and cultural cannibalism that had been normalized for generations.
Right. The future was already being devoured long before the siege walls were ever built.
Yet is a harrowing architectural framework.
It's incredibly bleak, but it makes you think.
It does. When we zoom out and look at the entire spine of the author's argument, it all revolves around the immense, unforgiving weight of continuity.
Yeah.
It forces us to examine what we inherit, the mechanics of the systems we tolerate, and exactly what kind of future we are generating.
And the author leaves us with a critical distinction to synthesize all these mechanics.
What's the distinction?
Destroying poison is not the same as murdering the future.
Okay, that makes sense based on the cancer analogy.
Right. It is childish to pretend that a toxic, generative death order will not relentlessly replicate its own poison.
Sure.
But the author warns, falsely labeling innocent life as poison to justify destroying it is the ultimate unforgivable sin.
And navigating that distinction brings us right back to the infrastructure of mercy.
It really does.
Ancient judgment was brutally constrained by ancient capacity. A lack of logistics, a lack of grain, a lack of communication grids, that all made mercy mathematically impossible at scale.
But modern judgment must be measured against modern capacity.
Exactly. We spent this time dissecting ancient kings, Bronze Age sieges, and mutating cells. But the true weight of this text rests squarely on us.
The author closes the argument with a principle that should honestly haunt modern civilization.
Let's hear it.
Greater capacity to separate the person from the poison creates a greater moral obligation to actually do it.
Because we live in an era of unprecedented capacity.
Exactly. We possess the most advanced psychological frameworks, the most expansive educational systems, and the most robust communication infrastructures in human history.
We theoretically have the capacity to adopt, to heal, to reform, and to integrate.
So the deeply provocative question you have to ask yourself as you look at our modern world is this: are we actually utilizing this vast trillion-dollar infrastructure to do the hard, grueling work of separating the poison from the person?
Are we actually doing it?
Right. Are we truly integrating and healing the marginalized and the hostile? Or, despite all of our technological and social advancements, are we simply inventing cleaner, more bureaucratic, and invisible ways to consume our own future?
Are we just building more sophisticated machinery to devour the seed?
That is the question.
That is a question that demands serious reflection. Well, thank you for joining us on this intense exploration of the roots of survival and judgment.
It's been a heavy one.
It has. We examined the etymology, the biology of continuity, and the brutal mechanics of ancient mercy. Hopefully, you walk away with a fundamentally altered perspective on history and what it truly costs to build an infrastructure capable of grace. Until next time, keep questioning the roots.